Hi everybody, my name is Elizabeth and I'm back today to share some more of the books that I've been reading during quarantine. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely spent a lot of time outside this summer just enjoying the weather, having some socially distanced bonfires outside, and just getting as much of that sun and warmth in as I could before what seems like it might be a long winter. So I didn't read as much as I did earlier in the year, but with the temperatures getting cooler again, I have finished some books lately, and I thought it might be fun to share them with you. So I have 4 books I'm going to talk about today, and I am going to start with one that I've been meaning to read for a while and finally got around to. This is the Overstory by Richard Powers, and I've been hearing a lot about this since it came out. It came out in 2018, and it got a lot of press and really great reviews. And it always sounded interesting to me, but then I would sometimes read the summary and not exactly understand what it was going to be about. So I'm going to read it to you and see what you think. Anyway, it says, an Air Force loadmaster in the Vietnam War is shot out of the sky, then saved by falling into a banyan. An artist inherits 100 years of photographic portraits, all of the same doomed American chestnut. A hard-partying undergraduate in the late 1980s electrocutes herself, dies, and is sent back into life by creatures of air and light. A hearing and speech-impaired scientist discovers that trees are communicating with one another. These 4 and 5 other strangers, each summoned in different ways by trees, are brought together in a last and violent stand to save the continent's few remaining acres of virgin forest. In his 12th novel, National Book Award winner Richard Powers delivers a sweeping, impassioned work of activism and resistance that is also a stunning evocation of the natural world. From the roots to the crown and back to the seeds, the Overstory unfolds in concentric rings of interlocking fables that range from antebellum New York to the late 20th century timber wars of the Pacific Northwest and beyond, exploring the essential conflict on this planet, the one taking place between humans and non-humans. There is a world alongside ours, vast, slow, interconnected, resourceful, magnificently inventive, and almost invisible to us. This is the story of a handful of people who learn how to see that world and who are drawn up into its unfolding catastrophe. The Overstory is a book for all readers who despair of humanity's self-imposed separation from the rest of creation and who hope for the transformative, regenerating possibility of a homecoming. If the trees of this earth could speak, what would they tell us? So I thought that was really interesting, but I didn't exactly, at first when I was like, is this a fantasy book? Are the trees going to actually talk? It is not, although there are some elements of, I don't want to say the supernatural, maybe magical realism is a better word. It's a difficult read in many ways. There's a bunch of different characters who are all deeply affected by tragedy, as equally as they are deeply affected by trees. And it's hard, too, to think about the destruction that humans have done across the natural world. And that's definitely at the front and center of this book. But it's really beautiful and really draws you in, and it's very immersive. It's a world in and of itself. That being said, I found the first part when all the characters are being introduced to be the most riveting, and then it slowed down for me. And I had read somewhere that someone said that this was a book that you don't read as quickly as you read other books. You pick it up and you kind of immerse yourself in it for a bit, and then you put it down and maybe come back to it. And it's not one that you're going to tear through. And I would agree with that, actually. And for that reason, I think it's actually the perfect book to read over the winter when maybe you're just cozy and hanging out inside and you just want something that you can pick up and put down and really get lost in but not feel rushed through. And like I said, in many ways it's a challenging read, both for the writing and for the events that happen in it. But it's a beautiful book and something I would highly recommend um, to anyone who's at all feels connected to the natural world. So that's the Overstory, Richard Powers. On a vastly different note, I read the latest by J. Courtney Sullivan. This is called Friends and Strangers. She is actually one of my favorite authors. She wrote a wonderful book called Commencement, one called Maine, another one called The Engagement, and then most recently before this, why am I losing my mind? Oh, Saints for All Occasions. That was incredible. And this is her latest, Friends and Strangers, and it is about a woman who has recently had a baby and feels kind of lost. Her husband has, they've moved for her husband's job. She's left behind her friends in her apartment that she usually likes. And she's feeling kind of lost and aimless and maybe has a little bit of postpartum depression. And so she hires this local college girl to babysit her new son while she tries to get some work done during the day. And they forge this really special connection and, just become really close. And then, some things happen that make the story interesting. I'll read you the summary here. Elizabeth, an accomplished journalist and a new mother, is struggling to adjust to life in a small town after 20 years in New York City. A job opportunity for her husband and the chance to live closer to his financially struggling parents convinced Elizabeth to move. But alone in the new house with their infant son all day and awake with him much of the night, she feels uneasy and adrift. She neglects her work, losing untold hours to her Brooklyn Moms Facebook group, her, quote, influencer sister's Instagram feed, and text chains with the best friend she never sees anymore. Enter Sam, a senior at the local women's college who is hired by Elizabeth to babysit. Sam is struggling to decide between the path she's always planned on and a romantic entanglement that threatens her ambition. She's worried about her student loan debt and what the future holds. In short order, Sam and Elizabeth grow close. Sam becomes Elizabeth's confidant, a repository for all the secrets Elizabeth is too ashamed to tell even her husband. Elizabeth, in turn, offers guidance, allaying Sam's fears. But when Sam finds an unlikely kindred spirit in Elizabeth's father-in-law, the true differences between the women's lives are starkly revealed, and a betrayal has devastating consequences. A masterly exploration of modern motherhood, power dynamics within friendships, and privilege in its many forms, Friends and Strangers brilliantly reveals how a single year can shape the course of a life. Which seems very relevant to us because I'm sure 2020 has shaped the course of many of our lives. So this was actually a quick read. It's a long book, but it goes pretty fast. And J. Courtney Sullivan, she's great at making characters, and it's interesting because often many of the characters in her books aren't super likable. Like, there's not one who's a favorite necessarily. They're not all likable, but they're very real. And I liked that part where it said it explores privilege in its many forms, because I think that's really what this book does in a number of different ways, not just between Elizabeth and Sam, but between Sam's friends and Sam, and between the dining workers at the school and the people who attend the local college, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't call it a light read necessarily, because there are some difficult themes, and there's obviously some it's not all fun and games in the book, but it does go quick, and she's a great author, and I would recommend this one if you're looking for something that just kind of will take your mind off things, and you can kind of get lost in other people's problems and other people's lives. So that was Friends and Strangers. Many of you are probably familiar with this author, Lisa Jewell. She writes a lot of thrillers. I had never read any by her before. I don't think I may have. I can't remember, but I didn't think I had. This one is Watching You. I picked it up because over the summer, I just wanted quick things to read, and I was interested in just getting really into a book and finishing it in a couple days. And I like psychological thrillers. And it was fine, in my opinion. I don't think I understood the ending. So I would be interested in actually talking to other people who had read this book, of which I don't know any of. None of my friends had read it. But it, I honestly didn't understand like the twist at the very end. And it was quick, it was exciting, it kept me guessing what was going on, but I did feel like the characters were a little bit tedious, and the whole, like I didn't predict what was going to happen, but when it did actually happen, it wasn't mind-blowing. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, it was kind of like, oh, well, sure, I guess I could see how that is possible. And it was almost, in some ways, it was a little too far-fetched, the things that happened, which I don't like in thrillers. But it was really quick, and it was fun to read. And I will give you the quick summary here. The instant New York Times bestselling author of Then She Was Gone delivers another page-turner about a shocking murder in a picturesque English town. Melville Heights is one of the nicest neighborhoods in Bristol, England, home to doctors and lawyers and old money academics. It's not the sort of place where people are murdered in their own kitchens. But it is the sort of place where everyone has a secret and prying eyes lurk behind every curtain. In Lisa Jewell's latest brilliant suspense, no one is who they seem, who has been murdered, and who would have wanted one of their neighbors dead. Watching You will keep you guessing until the startling revelation on the very last page. Yeah, so it was interesting. It was quick. I'm a little over the like watching you thrillers where someone's peeping from behind a window and like spying on their neighbors. But I mentioned that to my partner, and they were like, well, that's a pretty classic like thriller suspense scenario that's been happening for like centuries. So I guess that's just my personal dislike of that trope. But this was a good one. If you're interested in thrillers, you want something quick to read, it definitely pulls you in. And I honestly hope people read it so they can tell me what happened, because I did not get the final plot twist. And that's Watching You by Lisa Jewell. And the last book I actually don't have with me. It was due at the library. It had some holds on it. It's a cookbook, and it's called the Sous Chef. And by Sioux, it is S-I-O-U-X, as in Indigenous Sioux. And the Sous Chef is also known as Sean Sherman. He is the chef and author who wrote this book, and it was wonderful. It's a cookbook of all Indigenous recipes, mostly recipes from the Dakotas and Minnesota area. And it's unlike a cookbook that I've read before. I've recently been exploring more. I've been trying to learn more about Indigenous food culture, and so that's why I was inspired to put this on hold. So it was really a lot of new concepts to me that I loved reading about. And I think there's a lot of outdated ideas of what Indigenous food is, and Sean Sherman really dispels a lot of those. For example, there's no fry bread, but he does use very traditional Indigenous foods that the Indigenous people ate, before white people came to the Americas, and that Indigenous people would eat today. There's native wildflowers in many of his dishes, bison, duck eggs, all things like that, and a lot of wild rice. I was worried I would be daunted to try to cook something, and I didn't know how applicable it would be to someone who's not as familiar with Indigenous food. And there were certainly some recipes that I personally didn't feel confident cooking, or that I would want instruction with, such as bison. But many of the recipes were accessible and were so interesting to read about, and so cool to know that, people are re-accessing these foods that maybe were lost to many people, even to many Indigenous people for so long. It was great. Tons of recipes, tons of information about Indigenous food and culture, tons of information about how to prepare culturally accurate Indigenous foods. Yeah, it was great. I loved reading through it. I loved experimenting with some of the foods in it. And I wish I had it to hold up, but I don't. But it was great. I would highly recommend, if you're a chef or a cook, or even just interested in learning more about Indigenous food, I would absolutely put the Sous Chef on hold. It was great, and I was really excited to get my hands on it and read through it and do all that. So those are my recommendations for this most recent installment of Quarantine Reads. Just going through them again. Watching You, thriller by Lisa Jewell. Friends and Strangers by J. Courtney Sullivan. And The Overstory by Richard Powers. And then the cookbook, The Sous Chef, which is by Sean Sherman, who more familiarly goes actually by The Sous Chef. So check those out if you're interested, and I'm sure as the weather gets colder, I will be reading much more and sharing some more book recommendations with you. Thanks so much for watching.